Hello, today I want to show you probably the sharpest line in Sicilian defense, which is called the Dragon Sicilian. And the line is after knight f3, d6, d4, pawn takes, knight f6, knight c3, and now black is playing the move g6. What is the idea of this move? It's very obvious to put the bishop on the big diagonal on g7, where first of all he will be defending his own king, and then depending of course what white will do and where he will castle, he could attack on this diagonal, because often in this line white castles queenside and he can be very important. White has many possibilities, but usually he has to develop the bishops, and it's not dangerous if he gives this check, because after bishop d7 it's in favor of black to exchange pieces, because it helps you to develop the pieces, and then you just play knight c6 and bishop g7 and castle. So most of the time white goes either bishop e2 or bishop to e3. If he plays bishop to e2, black has to play bishop g7, and then if white castles, black also should castle. And now white can develop the bishop to e3, and what is the plan now for black? The knight has to go to c6, and now black has a few ideas. If white moves his queen, which is the most obvious move, now of course black can just play bishop to d7, and then if white makes some natural move like this, sometimes black takes on d4 and then goes bishop to c6. And the bishop is coming to this big diagonal to attack the pawn. After this you might move the queen to c7. You can prepare a6 and b5 if you want. The rook goes to c8 usually. And I think the game is around equal. Another standard idea when the queen moves is to jump knight g4. Because in Dragon it is very good for black if you can exchange the knight for the dark square bishop, because this will leave your bishop on g7 without opponent, and then he will be very important. For example, if he takes here and then he plays something like this, in this position black has a big advantage, because you are attacking on c3, on b2, and you have the files, you have the diagonals. White don't have any outposts for the knight, so this is already better for black, and probably white has to give the other bishop, which is not so important. And then if he attacks the bishop, you can just go back to d7, and after this the plan is more or less similar to the previous one: a6, b5, rook c8, and you can take the knight sometimes, or you can go knight e5, knight c4 to try to exchange the dark square bishop. So this line is not so dangerous for you, but he can play also the move f4, which is a little bit more active. And now black has this very common trick: queen to b6, attacking the pawn, but also if he defends the pawn, black can take knight takes e4. And now if white takes the knight, black also takes the knight, and now black is with extra pawn, the one on e7. And if he jumps, let's say, knight to f5, now you can just take on c3, because you attack the queen. And then even if you move the queen back to c7, already you're defending everything, and you have extra pawn. White has also very bad pawn structure, so this is good for you. And here the only move for white is queen to d3. And here you must know a little bit of theory, because now when white is defending the pawn, you cannot take here, because now the bishop is defended. So after knight takes c6, for instance, the queen is hanging, and then you have to capture the knight, but your knight is hanging on e4. So if you want to move the knight, you have to go to g4. This is one of the best moves, because now you attack the bishop. He cannot go back. So either he takes the bishop, or he has to do something with the knight. if he takes the knight, now you have to be careful because this is not hanging, so if you take the bishop it could be knight to f5 or the knight can jump somewhere. So better is to take this knight. Now you attack the bishop. He has to take more or less, and after queen takes, check, this position is I think completely equal, so black doesn't have any problems. Now another setup which actually is more dangerous is when white tries to castle queenside. He can start with bishop to e3, and then his plan is to play queen to d2, castle queenside, and then to start to push the pawns towards your king. And if you remember, I told you that in general this is good to exchange the knight for the bishop, but if you go now knight g4, hoping that he will play the queen and then you capture, this would be a mistake. White will play now something very strong, not bishop f4 obviously, because then after e5 it will be a fork, but bishop to b5, check. And surprisingly now we cannot defend the knight, because if you play here, now he simply can take the knight. And that's why you have to start with this move, and then already sometimes you can go for knight g4. So white usually plays f3. Now you can play knight c6. White could play queen d2, and this is one of the central positions in the dragon, where white is choosing between castle and between bishop to c4. What is the difference between those two lines? Castle allows black to push d5, and I think black has to go for d5, although some people here play this line, knight takes, bishop takes, and then bishop to e6. And then black has some kind of counterplay if white doesn't know what to do, because if white starts with this move, black will play queen a5, and then you can play rook c8, threatening at some moment rook takes c3, and then queen a2. There are some ideas for black, or b5, b4 to attack against a2, but white can play here in this position king to b1, and the problem is that this move he can play knight to d5. So why this move was very useful for white, because when you take on d2 this is not with check, and now he has this intermediate move knight to e7, check, and then you lose the pawn. So queen f5 is not so good, you have to play queen c7, which is a little bit more slow. And I think the best idea for black is to play d5. Now white has plenty of possibilities, but the most common is pawn take, knight take, and now white has to take on c6. Black has to take with a pawn, and now if white takes the knight, you must know here one very important move, because you're with the pawn down, and queen c7 is the best move. It seems like a blunder because the rook is hanging, but after bishop f5 you attack on c2 and you attack the queen. There is no queen e4, so he has to give the queen for two rooks, but this is better for black. So after queen c7, the idea is to move the bishop to f5 or to e6 or to b7, and then to use these open files to attack against his king. And usually white, let's say when you take a look at the top games, he doesn't take on d5, he plays bishop to d4. This is the best move, and from here again black has different options. Some people take on d4 and then play queen b6. Actually a lot of top players play this line. Also black can play knight takes c3, and now there is one kind of trap that when you give this check, king b1 is a mistake, because after e5 the rook is hanging. But he can play bishop e3 of course, and then this is leading to another interesting position in which white can take this pawn, but eventually black also have now a lot of open files and he has a strong initiative. And the third option is probably the best, by the way, when you play e5. Bishop c5 is the line, and now bishop to e6. Again, it seems like a blunder, but if white takes the rook, this leads to extremely dangerous attack for black, because now the idea is to play rook to b8 next, and to prepare e4, maybe queen b4. If he takes, or if he plays something like this, you just play rook b8, e4. You have also this move coming. If king to b1, simply rook b8, and then this attack is extremely strong on b2. Also, if he plays b3 later, you can play queen to a3. And white should not take the rook. He has to play knight e4. And then already you can play rook e8. And the line is very long, but in general, black has a good game. So this is in case you play d5 and he plays this castle. And now let's move to the main line, which is extremely complicated, where white plays this move, and usually black plays bishop d7, and now white castles queenside. Black has here many possibilities. The most popular is rook c8, threatening now knight takes d4 and rook takes c4, and white has to play this move. And now I think the best move is knight to e5. The idea is to play the queen to a5, then you want to push b5, knight c4, b4. White also is attacking usually on the king side. And in the last few years, black is meeting this move with h5. In the past, he was ignoring the movement of this pawn, but this was allowing white to push h5, to open the h file, and after bishop h6, which is his main idea, to exchange the bishop, to open the h file, and then to bring the queen to h6, which is very dangerous. So better is to play h5 to stop this idea. And then again, there are many possibilities like king b1, bishop g5, bishop h6. So in general, you have to remember that the idea is to jump on c4. The queen usually goes to a5, and you want to push b5, b4, or sometimes even b5, a5, a4. And this is extremely interesting and complicated line.